The lawyer stopped mid-page.
The true owner of these properties is Mrs. Ellen West.
The pen slipped from Dorothea's hand. For the first time in 30 years, those eyes, the ones that had always looked down at her daughter-in-law, began to tremble. To reach that moment, Ellen had a story no one knew about. Let's go back to where it all began. Every Thanksgiving morning, Ellen was up by 5 o'clock. While the rest of the house still slept, she stood alone in the kitchen preheating the oven, trimming fresh herbs, polishing the silverware one piece at a time. For 30 years, without a single exception, that morning was no different. November frost had settled white across the lawn outside the window. Crystal glasses stood in a neat row on the mahogany table. Ellen's hands moved from one cloth napkin to the next, folding each one precisely. They were the hands of a woman past 70, but every movement was exact. Footsteps on the stairs didn't come until well past 9. Dorothea Harper, 75 years old. Pearl necklace, cashmere cardigan, every strand of white hair perfectly set. She stepped into the kitchen doorway and opened the refrigerator. She asked about the cranberry sauce and reminded Ellen that Mrs. Margaret had something to say last year when they used the canned kind. Ellen told her she had made it from scratch. Second shelf. Dorothea took out the glass jar and held it up to the light. She gave a small nod, but she said nothing more. It probably never occurred to her that a compliment was in order. In the world Dorothea had grown up in, a good daughter-in-law was one who kept moving. And sitting at the table was for guests. At least, she believed that with complete conviction. By 3 o'clock, the house was full. Dorothea's bridge club friends, Robert's business colleagues, the neighbors from down the street. Laughter filled the living room, and crystal wine glasses clinked against each other. Robert Harper sat at the end of the sofa, holding his glass. 73 years old, gray sweater vest. His face was warm, but he looked tired somewhere underneath it all. A colleague told him his instincts were always sharp. Something about a vineyard investment. Robert waved it off. Just luck, he said. Then he added quietly that what he really wanted someday was to do something for veterans. Build a proper support center. The room laughed. They smiled the way people smile when they hear something that sounds just like the person they're listening to. At that moment, Robert's gaze drifted toward the kitchen. Ellen was coming into the living room with a tray, passing canapés around one by one. Not a single person made eye contact with her. From the sofa, without turning her head from the guests, Dorothea said Ellen that Mrs. Margaret's glass was empty. Ellen picked up the wine bottle, walked over, filled the glass quietly, and returned to the kitchen. Sitting at the table was for guests. Ellen had accepted that fact a long time ago. Or perhaps she had only been pretending to. The dishes weren't done until past 10 o'clock. 12 sets of dinner plates. 12 wine glasses. 12 coffee cups. The sink was clean again, and the counter held nothing. From the living room, laughter still drifted through. Ellen opened the back door and stepped outside. The cold November air swept across her face. She breathed in deeply. Above her, the sky was full of stars. She pulled a worn notebook from her coat pocket. The leather cover was rubbed thin with use, but it was still tied shut firmly. Inside columns of numbers, rental income records, donation entries, trust account balances. Ellen West had another life that no one knew about. A life she had never once spoken aloud for 30 years. The back door opened. It was Robert. He asked what she was doing out there, said it was cold. Ellen slipped the notebook back into her pocket. Just getting some air, she said. Robert came and stood beside her. A silence passed between them. He told her he was grateful for today. That without her, his mother would have. Ellen said it was fine. He told her it wasn't. He said he knew that. He took her hand. It was cold. Ellen nodded, but didn't move. She looked up at the star-filled sky for a long time. Robert was a good man. But sometimes, being good isn't enough. That night, Ellen took an old envelope from the nightstand drawer. The words, "Trust Agreement," were faintly written on the front. It was a document she had signed herself in 1994. 2 months before the wedding. Robert stirred in his sleep and asked what she was doing. "Nothing," she said. "Go back to sleep." She slid the envelope deep into the drawer and turned off the light. In the darkness, Ellen lay still for a long time, staring at the ceiling. She didn't close her eyes. Robert Harper passed away 14 days after Thanksgiving. A heart attack. At 3 in the morning, while he was asleep. The church was filled to the last pew. The flag was draped over the casket. Dorothea sat in the front row. Black veil, handkerchief, red-rimmed eyes. But no tears fell. Ellen sat beside her. Her hands rested neatly on her lap. The pastor said Robert Harper was a good husband, a good son, and a man who loved his community. Ellen's gaze moved to the casket. Her lips moved silently. No one could tell what she was saying. A week after Robert was gone, Attorney David Chen's office was quiet. A few autumn leaves drifted past the window in the wind. Heavy law books lined the shelves from floor to ceiling. Dorothea sat in the chair across from the desk. Handbag on her lap. Back perfectly straight. Ellen sat beside her quietly. The attorney said they were gathered today for the reading of Robert Harper's will. Dorothea reached for a pen and said they could start with the list of assets. She had a lot of things to sort out. The attorney turned a page and stopped. He said there was something to confirm first. He turned to Ellen. 432 Maple Street. 1840 Oak Avenue. 2156 Park Drive. Did those addresses mean anything to her? Yes, Ellen said. Dorothea frowned and asked why. Weren't those the buildings Robert had invested in? The attorney said actually, no. A long silence settled over the room. The pen slipped from Dorothea's hand. The sound of it hitting the floor rang out sharper than it should have. The attorney said these properties have always belonged to Mrs. Ellen West. She inherited them from her father before the marriage, in 1994. And has been managing them through a trust ever since. Dorothea's voice cracked as she said that couldn't be right. She had seen it herself. She had watched Robert sign the contracts. The attorney explained that Robert had handled the management of the buildings. Ownership had always been with Mrs. West, from the very beginning. Dorothea turned and stared at Ellen. Her eyes were a storm of confusion and fury. She asked if Ellen had known. From the very beginning? Yes, Ellen said. Dorothea asked why she had never said anything. Ellen thought for a moment. Then, quietly and steadily, there was no reason to. Dorothea couldn't look at her daughter-in-law for a long time after that. Her gaze drifted to the window. A single maple leaf floated slowly down to the ground, and she watched it fall for a very long time. For 30 years, Dorothea Harper had looked down at her daughter-in-law. Now, she no longer knew where to look. In 1994, Ellen's father had left her 3 buildings. She had placed them quietly into a trust. Most of the monthly rental income was set aside for causes she believed in. A portion was kept as a reserve. Robert had never known. The mansion where Dorothea lived, the building where Robert's business had proudly operated, all of it had always been Ellen's. The truth was, she had never been indifferent to money. She had simply been someone who knew how to handle it quietly. And for a very long time. That evening, Ellen stood by the window of her small apartment. Outside, people were making their way home from work. A couple walking together. A child on a bicycle. Raindrops began to tap, one by one, against the glass. Her phone rang. The screen read Dorothea. Ellen did not answer. The ringing stopped. A moment later, a message came through.
We need to meet.
Ellen looked at the screen for a long time. Outside, the rain was getting heavier. What she would choose to do no one knew yet. The story continues in part 2. If you'd like to stay with us for the rest of Ellen's journey, please subscribe and turn on notifications. Thank you for listening. Previously on Golden Tales Radio. For 30 years, Ellen West had been invisible in her own home. The quiet daughter-in-law who rose at dawn every Thanksgiving, polished the silverware, and never sat at the table with the guests. But when her husband Robert passed away, everything changed. In the attorney's office, Dorothea Harper learned the truth. The mansion she lived in, the buildings she thought her son owned, all of it had belonged to Ellen from the very beginning. Inherited from her father in 1994, managed in silence for 3 decades. The pen slipped from Dorothea's hand. That night, Ellen stood alone in her apartment, staring at her phone. A text message from Dorothea, "We need to meet." And Ellen had a choice to make. The rain had stopped sometime before dawn. Ellen had not slept. She had spent the entire night sitting on the sofa, phone screen dark, still held in her hand. On the table, documents were spread open. The trust agreement, property deeds, rental contracts, 30 years of records lying quietly in a stack. Outside the window, morning came slowly. A thin layer of sunlight spread across the wet street. One image kept returning to her mind all through the night, changing the locks on the mansion. That door Dorothea walked through every single day. One key was all it would take. One piece of paper. Ellen pressed her fingers against the windowsill. Cold. She closed her eyes slowly, then opened them again. By the time morning arrived, she already knew her answer. Revenge was not what she wanted. Or more precisely, she had known all along that there was something that outlasts revenge. Dorothea came 3 days later. When Ellen heard the doorbell, she already knew who it was. It took her a moment before she opened the door. Dorothea stood in the hallway. No pearl necklace, no cashmere cardigan, just a black coat, and no handbag. Her hair was slightly less composed than usual. The two women looked at each other. Dorothea was the first to look away. Her voice was tight in her throat as she asked if she could come in. Ellen opened the door wider. Dorothea sat on the sofa. She tried to keep her back straight, then gave up. Ellen went to the kitchen and made tea. 2 cups. She set them on the table without a word. Dorothea wrapped both hands around her cup. They were trembling. She said she had received the rest of the documents from the attorney. Ellen sat across from her and waited. Dorothea said, "The mansion too, it was yours, from the very beginning." "Yes," Ellen said. Dorothea asked she had heard that. Even the funeral costs had come out of Ellen's account. Ellen said nothing. Dorothea stared down into her teacup. A long silence. She said, "I thought you had nothing." "So I." The words broke off. Dorothea's jaw trembled slightly. "That's why I treated you the way I did." Ellen listened. Then she looked out the window for a moment. A bare branch swayed in the wind. Ellen asked quietly, "If I had had nothing, would anything have been different?" Dorothea couldn't answer. That was the answer. The two women sat without speaking for a long while. The tea grew cold. Or rather, there was no sound at all. After Dorothea left, Ellen took out an old photo album. A wedding photo. Young Ellen and Robert, smiling. Dorothea stood beside them. She was smiling too, but her eyes were not. Christmas photos. Thanksgiving photos. Family trips. In every single photograph, Ellen stood just slightly behind everyone else. She turned the pages slowly, then stopped. A photograph, old and dog-eared, at the corner. Ellen with her father. She must have been around 25. She was beaming, fully and freely. There were words her father had spoken to her, in his last days. "Ellen, these buildings are your freedom. No matter what anyone says, keep them in your name. Use them the way you want to." She had done exactly as he asked. For 30 years, She closed the album. Her hand rested on the cover for a moment. Ellen returned to David Chen's office 3 days after that. This time, she came alone. The attorney asked if she had made a decision. She said she had. She wanted to sell all 3 buildings. The attorney paused. He said it was a considerable amount of money. Had she thought about how she would use it? Ellen said that Robert had always wanted to do something for veterans. A real support center. That was what she wanted, to build a proper one. The attorney picked up his pen. He asked about the remaining property, the mansion, where Dorothea Harper was currently living. Ellen was quiet for a moment. She looked out the window, then turned back. She said she wanted to keep a small apartment for Dorothea, with a lifetime residency condition, for her mother-in-law. The attorney asked carefully, was she certain? Quietly, but without any hesitation, yes. The attorney nodded and began filling out the documents. Ellen looked out the window. The sky was high and clear. The last autumn leaves scattered in the wind. Dorothea moved out of the mansion in early December. She didn't take much of everything accumulated over 30 years. What she brought with her was a few sets of clothes, some old photographs, and a small ceramic cup her son had made as a child. The new apartment was small. A living room and 1 bedroom. A small table by the window. The light came through beautifully. Dorothea stood at the window. Outside was a park. An elderly couple sat on a bench together holding hands. She pressed her hand against the glass. It was cold. That was the first time Dorothea cried since losing her son. The very first time. The last time Ellen saw Dorothea was in the deep of that same winter. The same cafe. The same window seat. This time, Dorothea had arrived first. Ellen walked in. Dorothea stood up. The 2 women faced each other. No handshake. No embrace. But Dorothea looked directly into Ellen's eyes. For the first time. After they sat down, Dorothea reached into her handbag and took out an old envelope. She set it carefully on the table. She said Robert had taken it, that she had been keeping it. Ellen opened the envelope. Inside was a photograph. A young Ellen, early 30s, standing in the backyard, looking up at the sky, laughing. Her hair was blowing in the wind. She was smiling fully, as if she hadn't a care in the world. Ellen's gaze rested on the photograph. Slowly, with difficulty, Dorothea said, I treated you wrong. I can finally see that now. She didn't kneel. But that day, for the first time in 30 years, Dorothea spoke to Ellen as an equal. Ellen took the photograph. She looked at it for a long time. Outside the window, it had begun to snow. Silently, slowly, in a low voice, Dorothea asked, why did you leave me the apartment? Ellen looked up from the photograph. After a pause, she said, because I thought Robert would have liked it. Dorothea pressed her lips together. The warmth rose in the corners of her eyes, and the tears she had been holding back slid quietly down her cheeks. Ellen saw it. She said nothing. She turned her gaze to the window. Snowflakes touched the glass. The 2 women sat like that for a long time, until the tea had gone completely cold. I don't know whether the 2 of them met often after that. Probably not. 30 years of distance doesn't close over a single cup of coffee. But Ellen West seemed, in some way, a little different after that day. She added another potted plant to her windowsill. She lifted the lid of a piano that had sat unopened for years. Come spring, the groundbreaking for the Veterans Support Center was scheduled. The building was to carry Robert Harper's name. Ellen had chosen that herself. And that photograph, the one of her laughing in the wind with her hair flying free, was placed on Ellen's desk. In a frame. The young woman from 30 years ago was looking at the woman she had become. Ellen West did not choose revenge. What she chose was something that lasts far longer. Her own dignity. Thank you for staying with Ellen's story to the end. If it resonated with you, I'd be grateful if you'd subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments. Until next time.